Welcome to Openly Spoken, the podcast to help you show up, speak out, and be seen in healthy relationships. On this show, we talk about self-love, sexuality, relationship tips, including ending the cycle of toxic relationships, and healing and thriving after heartbreak. Hi, I'm your host, Celia, and I am a certified sex, love, and relationship coach, helping ambitious women with a history of toxic relationships feel deeply connected in healthy love. These are such important topics that every woman deserves, so if you could leave this show a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help more women find this, it would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you so much for being here today. Now let's dive into the show. Welcome to Openly Spoken, the podcast to help you show up, speak out, and be seen in healthy relationships. My guest today is Seonaid Lee. Seonaid is a multi-passionate writer and teacher who is deeply interested in how we find agency in systems that are too large for us to understand. Can't wait to get into that. She believes that our intimate relationships are a space in which we can practice vulnerability, desire, and speaking up so that we can bring those skills out into the rest of our interactions in the world. Welcome to the show, Seonaid.
Wow. I wrote a really good intro for myself this time. I write a new one every time because I've got a slightly different focus from one conversation to another, since I'm really talking about agency and complex systems.
Yeah.
So I'm always interested to hear what I said about myself.
I also was checking out your website before this because I was like, yeah, but what is the exact title besides multi-passionate writer? And I found secular mystic and practical academic. And I wonder if you still resonate with that.
Well, that was what I wrote for that podcast appearance.
Yeah, that was also for a podcast. Yeah.
It was. Yeah. Yeah. I was on another podcast where I was talking about the vital importance of maintaining our infrastructure. So yeah, when I say I'm multi-passionate, it's not exactly true. It's that I'm really interested in complex systems and human agency in complex systems. And the complex systems take many, many different forms. So
nice. Well, today we're going to be talking about energetic consent. And I think that the best place to start would be around the topic of radical self-love. And so as you come into this conversation, when I just mention radical self-love, what is the first thing that kind of bubbles up for you?
I would say, okay, so I'll say the thing over the Christmas vacation, I was thinking about discipline, and my word of the year is discipline, but not like that harsh discipline, but do you love yourself to bring discipline to your daily activities? Do you love yourself enough to trust your goals and aspirations and show up for them rather than getting distracted by the myriad things that are pulling at us all the time? And so for me, what bubbles up is that radical self-love comes to also a radical self-trust. And when I talk about discipline, I don't mean following a strict schedule. I mean showing up and doing the things you actually genuinely deeply want to do that you feel are aligned with your goals and aspirations and the way you want the world to be. And so it's, I guess, authorizing yourself to take action in the world in alignment with your own understanding rather than that of other people.
Mm-hmm. I love that. The way I like to think of discipline in that way is, this is what resonates for me. I'm not saying this is the right way. I like to use the word devotion. For me,
That's
when
a good
I think
word
of,
for it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me, when I think of discipline, it's a little bit harsher and it's a little bit you have to wake up at 4:30 a.m. no matter how shitty your sleep was last night. Whereas
it's
devotion,
yeah.
Go ahead.
It's taken me a lot of years to come to this. I've had the paramitas, the I think 6 paramitas in a frame on my wall I
What is
had
that?
them for a lot of years. That's the practices of Buddhism. And it's the devotional practices, effectively, of like showing up, doing your work, speaking the truth, touching the ground because you're already present. And actually, discipline, I think, is the one that's defined as touching the ground because you're already present. So it's been like, what does this word mean? If we didn't have
Yeah.
these sort of pathological, kind of stick related experiences of it, what would it
Yes.
mean for discipline to be a devotional practice as opposed to treating yourself as a thing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that that's where we get the fear of discipline is about treating yourself as a thing rather than providing yourself with the guardrails to say, we're not spending 9 hours doom scrolling today because that was not what we planned to do. And I know I refer to myself in the plural a lot because of that sort of
Do that
the
too.
pulls we have, the various
Yes.
parts of ourself trying to pull
Yes.
us in different directions. And, I put that as my word of the year. And then I've had just a terrible time with it for the last month. Yesterday, I was writing about in my morning pages, which you're supposed to write 3 pages, and I wrote like a page and a half. And most of it was, I don't want to be here. I've got 50 other things I could be doing instead. How do I even choose? Like, that's
Yes.
but when I say, like, when I pick a word of the year, I heard someone say, if you pray for patience, what God will deliver to you is opportunities to practice patience.
Yes, it's the cosmic joke, huh?
Right? You don't suddenly become a patient person. You become someone whose patience is being tested and challenged
Yes.
constantly. So when I come to terms with a term, last year it was spacious, and I had to give myself lots and lots of opportunities to do things, to try things out. And now I'm like, well, if I go to the other end and go, okay, we got really big and broad. Did I actually get much done last year? And so it's wrestling with the question of what does it mean to get stuff done? What stuff should we be getting done? And is that even a reasonable goal?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
your radical self-love is like that constant questioning of, is it a reasonable goal to get stuff done? Or are we just onboarding those patriarchal, capitalist, imperialist values into our bodies and then using those things upon ourselves?
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of times in that kind of journey of getting the stuff done, and, moving through the busyness of life, a lot of times we're using our goal of I want to get this thing done as like, and then I will be worthy enough or happy and we forget to enjoy the day to day,
Yeah.
the present moment.
The way that I put that is, what are you trying to prove that
Mm-hmm.
you're afraid is not true?
Yes.
And that
That's a
actually
good
is,
one.
that's like 100% tied into the question of the energetic consent, which we can get to later in the conversation. But that's the question. It's not just what am I trying to prove? Because who you're trying to prove it to yourself ultimately is yourself. So underneath it, it's that I'm afraid is not true.
Yeah.
And that's embedded in all of these ego-driven actions. And ego isn't just aspiring and accomplishing and getting bigger. It's also diminishing and shrinking and martyring to prove that I'm good enough, quiet enough, well-behaved enough, I belong here. If I behave in these ways, I'll never be rejected. I'll never be lost. I'll never be alone. And we're always trying to prove these deep existential things to ourselves, but we're stuck with sort of superficial actions in the world that
Mm-hmm.
we're then manipulating. And so we're manipulating ourselves, we're manipulating the world, we're manipulating the people around us to address these deep existential dreads and fears.
Yeah. And it's totally an ego place because from my perspective, we're then stuck in the illusion of the ego, which tells us that we are separate instead of making us realize that we are all one and we're all part of the whole. And,
Yeah.
I'm the exact same as my cat, but my cat just happens to be in a cat body. And when we can realize that we are that when we realize that we are all one, then we realize that, that thing that we're trying to prove, from what I've seen with, myself and the one-on-one clients I work with, usually we're trying to prove that thing because we did not get it externally from our caretakers.
Yeah.
But when we realize that we are the same as our caretakers, then we get to caretake ourselves and we get to give ourselves the stuff that we needed but didn't get.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the patterns, they're flowing through us, right? They flow through our bodies where we're ingesting, we're onboarding, we're taking in experiences and ideas and concepts and metabolizing them and making sense of them and reordering them inside a body. And then they flow back out in the form of words, in the form of how we interact with the world. And our parents didn't have it either. Like, we're 10,000 years at least into ongoing concepts of control and treating the world as a thing rather than being in relationship with it. And so, I mean, I do definitely go back to that sort of agricultural foundation.
The invention of the plow.
Yeah, basically. But I saw Maria Mies. Do you know Maria Mies?
No.
She was one of the co-authors of a book called Ecofeminism, along with Vandana Shiva.
I need to
write
that
down. And I saw
down.
her give a talk probably about almost 20 years ago now. And it was called The Engineers of Gilgamesh. And I think she was talking about how sort of as we started to confine water and force it to go in particular ways and stop treating water as though it's alive, then we stop treating everything as though it's alive.
Yeah, because water
and
is life.
Including ourselves.
Yeah.
And including our families and including the people we interact with, that everything becomes, and this is going to a different, I saw Martin Buber, who's a theologian from the early 10th century, I think. He talks about I-thou relationships instead of I-it. And so we've been raised in an I-it relationship. And as women, especially, we were the it. We have been the it.
Yes.
In the entire Western conception of sexuality and the Abrahamic conceptions of sexuality, women are the it to whom sex is done.
Yeah.
And so reclaiming the I-thou, reclaiming relational ethics in our sexuality as well as everywhere else, we do that expanding the self, and we say everything is me. And I'm not me, ego Shona, me consciousness flowing through. This part happens to be called Shona.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's very hard to talk about it.
Yeah, I know.
As a worldview.
For sure. Yeah. And I love that you bring up the agricultural piece and then talk about women as it, because like that's where it started. Once we had farms and land and we owned land, like that's such a weird concept that we can own land. Then it became important for the men owning the land to know which children were his heirs to give the land to. So then
Only
that's when
because
women
we let men own the land too.
Yeah. Probably because, the plow, it requires a lot of upper body strength. And, typically, biologically, men have more upper body strength than women. I don't know. That's my theory.
There's all kinds of very complicated, weird things that I asked one of my kids is a historian, and I said basically, why is patriarchy? And she was like, do you really want that?
It's like a whole rabbit hole.
It's a whole rabbit hole. You're not going to come up with a snappy answer to that. I think we're also driven by the same kind of the discursive practices to sum things up and put them into nice encapsulated boxes when it's like shifting the sense of the self in the world rather than like we can't say how does this pattern emerge. We can say, how does this pattern work? We can kind of trace back and go, I see seeds of this pattern here and seeds of this pattern here. And these things converge in this way. And then you wind up with this massive global imperial patriarchal system, but the pieces all kind of converged over time. And there's not like one singular point that we can point to that's a cause. We have to kind of have that gestalt of the thing as a whole.
Yeah. And it's like a collective creation then at that point.
Yeah. Which is playing out through our bodies. It's playing out through our bodies. And so we wind up with whatever piece of it that we're holding that goes, here's my sort of, I think of this slider of my balance between itness and agentness. And it shifts from moment to moment. And oh my God, the people in power hate people like me. Because I don't have that nice, snappy, like certainty, that nice, tight certainty. And like, it's all fuzzy and unknowable. There's a whole lot of fuzzy unknowability to it. So,
yeah.
Is this usable at all? Is this too weird?
Yeah, I feel like I'm also just like digesting this and I'm like, because like I feel like we could go on a whole tangent here. What's coming up in me is also, just like the name of labeling this as patriarchy. I feel like sometimes, because like the root of that is patriarch, which, is like a father or a man. I feel like that kind of can put us in territories where then we're blaming men for all the problems in the world. And like, that's not the answer either.
No.
And that's something I see a lot in like feminist spaces is like they're basically doing the same thing by hating men and like thinking that like women need to rule the world. It depends on which
feminist spaces. It depends on which.
Yeah, it's not all of
spaces.
them. But in some of them, I'm like, this ain't it.
It's really hard because, I mean, if you use the framing that I have there, where the stories and the patterns flow through us, they assign us roles in this drama. And men are assigned the I in the I-it of that particular relation. But they're assigned the it in most of the other relations in their lives. And so there's a very small number of things each of us is the actor rather than the acted upon. And this is why I talk about that energetic consent, is recognizing the moment that you are the actor rather than the actor acted upon. And what are you doing to try to manipulate this system to get something back from it? That you're not honest about what you're doing.
Yeah.
That we're not clear in our communication when we say, I would like you to affirm this thing about me by doing this thing with me. But we don't say I would like you to affirm this thing about me. And so then we're trying to extract something energetically from the interaction that was not on offer because we didn't name it and we didn't talk about it. And we did. And I know it sounds super cold, but it isn't. It isn't. If you can be really, really honest in those sexual interactions and go, I'm feeling really insecure about my body right now. Could you do this thing to reassure me that you still find me attractive? And they'll be like, yeah, all over that. Or they might say, I can't do that for you. And we have to not take that as a confirmation that what we are afraid is not true, but they weren't the person to provide that affirming for us. You were saying you have to be able to. You don't have to entirely be able to do it yourself, but you have to recognize that nobody else has a veto on that either.
Yes. Yeah. And that, like, in my opinion, changes your whole behavior in relationship because you're coming to it without expecting your partner to fulfill all these needs from childhood that was unmet.
Yeah.
And like, some of those needs, hopefully will be met by a relationship because, true aligned love is healing in that way. However, it's completely different when you have done some of that inner work, whether it's before the relationship or while you're in one. Because I do think that sometimes when you talk about this stuff, it can get into a little bit of muddy waters where some people are like, okay, I have to be 100% perfectly healed before I'm in a relationship or before I become a mom or before whatever the thing is. Like healing and changing and shifting actually always happens.
over time. And it happens in relationship because one of the things you
Yeah.
do in your own practice is you go, that was not my best work. And instead of beating yourself up, you go, what was I really trying to do there? And you develop, not like you go and you learn your communication skills. You practice them over and over again. You read your Esther Perel and your John Gottman and your Marshall Rosenberg, the nonviolent communication, and you practice it and you reflect. You go, what was I trying to do there? Like, what's really happening? If you do it enough, you can catch yourself in the middle of a fight going, what am I trying to do here? What am I trying to get out of this? Hold on. I don't think we're fighting about what it looks like we're fighting about, because you're almost never fighting about what it looks like you're fighting about.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not going to float through the world like Jack Kornfield's got this book called After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, I think. And he talks about going away on this retreat and having this like ecstatic, open to the universe experience, and then going home and his family was still there and they were still annoying. They still had to figure out what they were having for dinner.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
And human beings will insist upon being separate people with their own motivations and goals and aspirations. And, if you're fortunate and you've done the work, there'll come a point where you will stop resenting them for that and start going, oh, actually, if everybody out in the world just did exactly what I wanted them to do, I would be living in a self-owned simulation and it would be boring as hell.
Yes.
Like it is. That would be hell.
Yeah. You'd never grow. In fact, you deteriorate into like a narcissistic trap.
Yes, you would. You would be living in the God realms, and the God realms are not healthy. We can see that the God realms are not healthy. It's being played out in front of us in real time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's going to hit the rest of us, but it's like, do the men in charge look like they're having a good time?
No,
they're not happy people. They're not content. They're not self-aware. They have the most power and money and access to resources of anybody on the planet, and they're not
They want more.
They want more. They're not okay.
Yeah.
But we don't have to conform to that. Like, we don't have to say, oh, well, we'll just give them everything in case that will make them feel better. No.
So how does energetic consent start at the societal level then? When we have, like, for context for people who are listening, it is the beginning of 2025.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big struggle.
Things are burning. Things are on fire.
Things are on fire. And, I my day job is in the tech industry. And I made a video. It was like, this is not, he made this specious claim that he's modernizing the systems. I'm like, no, that's a hack. You're not modernizing anything. That's the big question, because we have to have the courage to say, I do not consent, and then say it over and over and over again, regardless of the fact that awful things are going to be done to people and awful things might be done to us. Like my partner said to me last night, I think millions of people are going to die. And I said, that is probably likely. And he said, there's no reason that we shouldn't be among those people. And I was like, yeah, that is true. And so coming to terms with the fact that we're all mortal, we're all going to die.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather we didn't all die en masse right now, but what do we do with our mortality and how do we resist? If you go to the civil rights movements and nonviolent protests and they said you have to be able to take a beating. You can't go scared. You have to know that awful things can happen to you. And if we don't accept that awful things can happen to us, then they happen to everybody. So it's brutal. It's brutal. Like we're not prepared. And I've seen like somebody read a couple of Indigenous authors recently from South America. Can I just go grab a book?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Ailton Krenek. This one's called Life
The
is
cover
Not
is
Useful.
beautiful.
Isn't it beautiful?
Yeah.
He is an Indigenous person who lives in what's now called Brazil. He's in the Krenek River. And so that's his people. And his previous book that I read was about the river being polluted. Like it was the one that was destroyed by a tailings pond from a dam that just spilled and killed 600-kilometer long river. And they said the river's in a coma. And he said, basically, capitalism is going to do to you what it's been doing to us. And so you need to recognize that people like me and the people who have been not in positions of power, the people who have been enslaved, the people who have been marginalized, the people who have been doing the unpaid, brutalized labor of the world have already been going through this. And you need to ask us because we know how to deal with it. And you don't.
Yeah.
And that's like this coming to that and going, go with humility to the people who have been experiencing this and telling you that this is happening, and listen to them. Don't make them tell you. Read their books.
Yeah.
Find out what they've already written. Read the thinkers that have been. They've still been producing lots and lots of text in Africa. They've still been producing lots and lots of text in Indigenous populations. It just doesn't make it into our minds.
Yeah.
And I'm going, oh, yeah. They're definitely coming after me next. After we put this up,
After we publish this?
That woman is a dangerous radical and she must be neutralized.
This is going up in July, so we have until July to live.
Well, we'll see what happens between now and then.
It's nice to hear, though, that, my husband and I have these conversations as well. And it's nice to hear that, other couples are talking about this in their homes as, also, and having these same realizations of, how dire the situation is. And I'm like wondering, how can we gently meander this back to energetic consent? So we talked about at the societal level. So then at the societal level, what I would love to see is that larger levels of government do not impose their will on smaller levels of government. That more and more of the decision-making power divests to the periphery. So one of the, I guess, advantages I've had experiencing this world is that I grew up on an island in the Atlantic. And I have lived most of my life in very lower class, working class environments. Weirdly, my dad was a professor, so we were like the elites. We were the elites because we had a consistent job and income. But I grew up places where the resources were depleted to the extent that the economy had collapsed, where there was constant need for changes of employment. Everyone was retraining constantly. And the people in the federal government would come in and make training programs so where they would train like everybody in the entire town to be a hairdresser. Okay, well, you only needed 3. And everybody else needed something else to do. And so there's these monolithic approaches to solutions where what needs to happen is that more of the resources, more of the decision-making power needs to stay in the periphery. We can't keep treating every space in the world as a source that we can extract from, but recognize that the people and the land and the animals and the ecosystems we're already doing something with all of that energy. And if they're impoverished and marginalized and have no political power, and we come along and say, well, you should give me, I'm sorry, I keep hitting my microphone. That's okay. No problem.
And we come along and say, well, you could have this car if you gave us all your stuff. And it's like you're getting a temporary thing in exchange for a permanent loss of your livelihood and your ability to live and sustain yourselves in this land.
Mm-hmm.
And so the energetic consent has to recognize that there's political differences in power, and that if you are in the position of more power, you are cognizant and aware that that's what's happening, and that you genuinely do listening to the people who are there and the system that already exists to find out what their needs are, what their preferences are, what is actually available in the system, because most of the systems at the periphery are underfunded. They have lack of access to capital, by which I mean concentrated projects which we use to make permanent. I call them needle moving projects. So we don't extract that in exchange for something trivial. Like usually it's a very imbalanced exchange between the imperial core and the periphery. And so even to name the existence of the imperial core and the periphery is a step in the process of moving to energetic consent on a global level, even on a national level.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's this whole array in between, because there's that, like, what do you do in the bedroom? What do you do with your friends? What do you do in the workplace? How do you manage if you're in a group of 50 people? How do you manage listening and catching the needs and balancing the needs of the various people?
And that all starts with, like we talked about in the beginning, that like devotion and discipline. It all starts with that energetic consent with yourself and how you're treating yourself.
Yeah.
And then your closest relationships, and then, friends that maybe aren't that close, and then like neighbors, community, and like it starts at the individual level and it ripples out. And what we're seeing now is like that societal level, like the people in charge, they're missing that individual connection with themselves, that own energetic consent in their relationship with themselves.
Yeah. So their need for affirmation extends out to the entire planet.
Yeah.
That they need proof that they're okay, and they establish proof that they're okay by making everybody do what jump to their tune. But the thing that's deeper is that they still need to think that they're good people. So they have to write a story that says, we're improving these people's lives. They would be worse off without us. And they entered into this contract voluntarily rather than they had no choice not to, and they were coerced. That the use of the state, the power of the state, the power of withholding access to food, water, shelter, education, healthcare, the power of withholding access to sustenance is used to coerce people into acting in ways that are against their own interest, against the interest of their community, against the interest of their own people, however they think of that. Because we keep people fearful at the very, very base levels of reasoning and acting in the world by coercing them. And then people with power have to tell stories about how those people deserved that. And they benefited from that because they weren't capable of self-governance. They weren't capable of thinking and feeling. And really, aren't they lucky that they've got people like us to come along and do this for them? And so this is why that I said we have to have the ability to resist that, but that means we need to provide mutual care. We need to do those things. And, oh no, I'm definitely going to come out as an anarchist on this. The mutual aid, so that people aren't vulnerable to coercion. We care for one another so that somebody else cannot come along and say, I'm going to take away your housing and your food. Well, they can go, oh, well, my community's got my back. And so we have to join together in a community of care so that we have the ability to resist rather than letting people be picked off one by one.
Yes. So for women listening,
I didn't want to be an anarchist. I wanted to be an engineer.
I know the work that we end up doing like finds us. Like I feel like we don't really have a choice. It finds us. For women listening who really resonate with this energetic consent piece and are, looking at the world and are not excited about what they're seeing, how can they take this conversation and take the next step? Like where does one begin?
I think that the list of writers that I mentioned earlier can all be useful. I can't remember exactly who I pulled on, but
I wrote a couple of people down that you said. You wrote
okay, and we can
John
put them in the show notes
Godin,
maybe. Oh, John Gottman. John Gottman, Esther Perel. If you're
Esther Perel
wanting
is amazing.
Esther Perel, yeah. If you're wanting to start with this work, I mean, as on this podcast and what we're talking about here in self-love and relationships, then read books about Emily Nagoski. Nagoski?
Yes.
Yeah. Her one, We Have Come Together, I think, is really good.
I've read Burnout and I've read Come As You Are.
Yeah. And so those sort of build from their burnout's great for the self-love part because it also identifies like here she's a sexuality coach, and then her book is that she wrote with her sister is like, here's how this is playing out in your work life, in your daily life, in overproducing, in overconforming, in running on the wheel to prove that you're okay. So I would definitely work through Emily Nagoski's work and seek out spaces where people are talking about consent in broader terms. The energetic consent piece is one that I added on top of it because of my work in meditation and my Buddhist and mystical practices. But starting with consent in more conventional ways is a good starting point. What I found, I read a lot of the polyamory literature, and I got really bogged down in you only have control over your own reaction. And it took me probably about 5 years to go, that doesn't mean I have to just let everybody do whatever they want. It took me 5 years to go, oh, I'm allowed to say that's not acceptable. I'm walking away. And so
that's a big transformation, because the former is just like gaslighting your own desires.
Oh yeah. And I think that a lot of the spiritual practices about sort of accepting and
detachment,
being with the world as it is, if you use them to try, I keep thinking like I tried to use my meditation practices to ratchet myself into being okay where I wasn't. And so like your ego can use anything, including your meditation practices, including your spiritual practices, including your sexuality. Your ego can turn it back on itself. So like I would say be always aware of that radical self-love and the way that you're experiencing your inner voice as well.
I love that.
Yeah.
So because you mentioned consent in general and energetic consent, I'd love to know how you define the difference in those and like what specifically you're talking about when you say energetic consent.
So consent would be, would you go out with me? That'd be great. Would you like to come to bed with me? Can I do this? Will you do this specific thing? Can I touch you in this particular way? And you can say, yeah, I'm okay with that. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Yeah, I'm okay with that. And at every point along the way, you can have consented. But if you didn't have a conversation at the beginning of, what do you want out of this relationship? And you didn't have the conversation with yourself. And one of you is trying to prove how virile and powerful and sexy and how everybody just wants to jump into bed with me. And the other one is trying to prove that they are worthy of a long-term permanent relationship. They're not. It doesn't matter whether they agreed to each step along the way of the touching and the physical manifestation of the relationship. They're not having the same relationship, and they're trying to get things out of it that they're going to be in constant conflict over. And so the energetic consent is going, I really want to feel this way about myself, and I am asking you to play that role in my life. Do you consent to play that role in my life? Knowing that you're still going to be an agent and there's still going to be rough edges, but you don't cast somebody else in a role and then try to make them be that thing for you.
Yeah,
So
without
it's not
them
a surface
consenting.
level. It's a deeper, honest thing of what I'm trying to get out of this interaction before I say, can I do this thing to you in bed? To
Mm-hmm.
be honest, even if you're not even honest to them, like ideally you would like to be, but if you're honest with yourself and you can really go, I'm pretty sure this person wants something different out of this, then you will know that they didn't actually consent and you're tricking them. You might not be coercing them, but you could be tricking them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to use that to reinforce yourself. And they're going to use that interaction to reinforce whatever they think they're getting out of it. And the interaction itself is damaged by those two of you trying to extract something from it in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't become this lovely, harmonious exchange of energy. It's graspy
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you're both trying to get more than you're putting in.
Yeah. So this energetic consent comes from asking yourself, what is it that you are trying to get out of this relationship? What is this thing that you are afraid to, what was it like, afraid to know that isn't true?
What
What
are
was it that you
you
said?
trying to prove? What are you trying to prove that you're afraid isn't true?
Yes. Okay. What are you trying to prove that you're afraid isn't true?
And then you could flip that over and go, what am I afraid is true?
Yeah.
But it's usually like the action that you're doing is designed at some level to prove something about yourself and the world
Mm-hmm.
that you're afraid isn't true. And it's usually something really fundamental, like I'm allowed to be here. I'm safe. A lot of the time we're trying to prove that we're immortal, which is that's a bad starting
Because we're
point.
afraid of death subconsciously.
Yeah. Like a lot of the time we're trying to prove that we're immortal or all powerful. There's some really deep seated. So you can also do that 5 whys thing. I don't even know where that one comes from. I think it might come from process control or something. It might be super corporate, but you go, but why? But why? But why? And
I've heard of that
underneath
too.
there's going to be something really fundamental about, like, I know I spent a lot of years afraid I was alone in the universe
Mm-hmm.
with that, like, real, you were talking about the illusion of the ego and just that, like, I'm cut off, I'm isolated, and no one could ever possibly know me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, that's a deep seated, we might do some core wound stuff around that. And it's like, we can talk about how we acquired them from our parents, but I also see that people who came and they say, I had this beautiful, loving, fabulous upbringing, they still bring a core wound. So
Yeah.
we can talk about the manic mechanisms by which they arise, but I think we all have them.
Yeah. I think it's also because, what we're talking about, the asking yourself what you need out of the relationship, what are you afraid isn't true? Like, it sounds so simple, but it's not easy because it requires that self-awareness, which is a skill that is unfortunately not taught to most
Yeah.
people.
And then processing it as well. Processing it
Yes, like
as
not
well.
taking the truth of yourself to like berate yourself and,
That you're I'm permanently damaged. This is just how
yeah,
I
you're
am. No, no,
broken.
no,
Yeah,
no,
no, it
no,
has to
no.
be like with a lot of compassion and radical
Yeah.
acceptance and,
Yeah.
like treating yourself. I always like to say that it's like you're treating yourself as if you are your own baby or like child. Like you have to be gentle and yeah, that like guidance. So before we move into some closing questions, I'm curious if there's anything else that was on your heart today about energetic consent that you wish we would have touched on, or if you feel complete for now.
I do want to say that I think that our intimate relationships, and whether that's sexual or whether that's with our closest friends or with our families, are practice places for this. But almost all of us have these things I call semi-intimate relationships that are more formalized, and really we are playing roles where we're in the workplace and there's assigned roles. I would say working with those vulnerabilities in spaces where we have intimacy, where we know the other person well enough to say, I'd really like to do this process work, lets you do the work on yourself. And you can do the work on yourself and you can invite other people into the process work with you. But again, that's where they get to say, I'm not ready to do that process work. They're probably not going to be that nice about it. They're probably going to be much more aggressive and you might have a fight about it. But as you invite people into the process work, recognize that as you personally become more skilled, you can bring those skills of process work out to those more formal, structured, role-based interactions. And you can start to be more gentle about saying, can we name what's really happening here? Can we talk about the power dynamics that we're experiencing in this team? So your intimate relationships become your practice space, not because you're working things out in them, but because those are the people where you actually have a chance to like work it together. And then you become more skilled and you can bring them out into bigger spaces where you can name things and tell the truth about things.
Yeah.
So
So
well
I
think that they're seeds of new ways of being in the world. And the people who are in the current positions of power don't want us to have these conversations. That they are the exact conversations they're trying to make illegal.
Yes.
So having these conversations is an act of radical self-love, but it is an act of radical community love as well. Like really deeply radical at this point.
Which is wild because it's our birthright to be in deeply connected relationships and to be
caring
able to,
for one another is a radical act.
Yeah. Which is, it's so crazy. That's where we're at.
I know.
Yeah. So for the listeners, if we have been disappeared, you know why? Just kidding.
Well, I mean, are you scheduling this soon? Because if we're all gone, then no one's going to see it but us. Here's the deal. If somehow things go really tits up, dump all your recordings onto the podcast platform, whether they're ready to roll out or not. Make it archive.
Yeah. Yeah. I usually have things like scheduled out where it's like, it's there and it's going to post automatically. So it'll still post. But yeah, I love what you said because, you know, that the work around sexuality with both yourself and within intimate relationships, I've really seen how it ripples out into the rest of your life. Because that's like the deepest part of you that you can get to know. Like that's the deepest there's nothing deeper than that. Yeah. So for some closing questions, the first question that I ask every guest, which I feel like we kind of danced around this question already in our conversation, but I'm curious what you're going to say. What does self-love mean to you?
I would say the thing that's most important for me for self-love is one of my meditation teachers called it the sweetheart practice. That when you find those parts of yourself that are like, if you find yourself talking really harshly to yourself, you go, oh, honey, oh, sweetheart.
Yeah.
Oh, sweetheart. Is that really? I'm so sorry that you are experiencing that right now. And, you know, also think like eating lots of vegetables is important, like nourishing your body and caring for your body. And that does mean, I'm sorry, it means exercise. It does. Not in a harsh way, but your body is born to move. It's born to breathe. It's born to eat lots of healthy, brightly colored foods. And all of those things are good for it. That's not deprivation. You can also have cheesecake. You can eat Cheetos if you want to, but also the nourishment and then the nurturing and care. and
Yes.
treating your body as well as you would if it were your favorite pet.
Yes.
Like, we treat ourselves worse than we treat our pets.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you have to somehow objectify your body and yourself as a thing, at least treat it really, really well as a thing that you are deeply caring for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then eventually, hopefully, we'll also get to sink into our bodies and we're like, oh yeah, this feels really good. I love being in this body. Look what I can do.
Right. I love that. Yeah, I love that sweetheart practice because that allows you to access what I like to call your inner mother or inner caretaker.
Mm, yeah.
And you get to like have that, you get to access that like part of yourself that's like, I'm not a mom myself, but I used to work with kids and used to babysit a lot. And I always think of like when there is that thing I don't want to do, like the exercise, I access that part of me that is treating myself like I have this memory of this 2-year-old I used to babysit a lot who just like never wanted to brush his teeth at the end of the day. And it would just like throw a tantrum. And it's like he really doesn't want to do it. But I am there to help him do it so that his teeth don't fall out. Like there's a
That's
benefit.
the discipline. Yeah, that's the discipline.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I love that because it helps you access that like inner caretaker that allows you to have that tantrum, witnesses it, and it's like, okay, are you done? All right, let's go to the gym or let's do whatever the thing is that you said you would have discipline and devotion to do so that you can reach your desires that you said that you have. Okay, the next question is what makes you feel the most grounded?
Being on a trail at the top of a hill, looking out over the water.
Oh, I see it.
Absolutely love hiking. And I really love it on the edges of large bodies of water because that makes me go. It gives me a sense of my scale and how very, very small I am. And in that cosmic sense, then I feel that moment of being the droplet in the ocean and the speck. And there's really like, I'm very, very not much bigger than a mushroom or a squirrel or a plant. I'm much smaller than the trees. And
Yes.
I'm only here for a little period of time. So like deeply sinking into that truth is easiest for me when I'm out in the world as not naked, scared, and alone, but acknowledging that I'm just in the flow of things.
I just realized that we're at our hour and wanted to check in how you're doing with time.
I'm fine.
Okay. I just have 2 more questions.
Okay.
Okay. The next question is what is your favorite part about being a woman?
You know what? We have enormous amounts of liberty of self-expression. It's the era of time that we're in right now, but I have reconstructed myself over and over and over again. And I think we have a lot of liberty to do that in ways that men, for the most part, don't.
Yeah.
I see the men around me, and I'm thinking about clothing, but like hair, makeup, glasses, like everything we can change about ourselves. And I can put on my corset and my puffy shirt, or I can put on my pinstripe suit, or I can wear high heels or low heels or sneakers, or like I can disguise myself in a huge range of ways that I think men don't have access to.
Mm-hmm.
Including like I'm of an age that I can just make myself invisible. Like I can disappear into the background, or I can be very present in the foreground, and I get to pick that by how I costume myself in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you do embodiment coaching, so I'll just mention that like I love that you bring up this fashion piece because I feel like fashion is a very underrated tool for embodiment because when you put on that like putting on that striped pin suit versus the corset, like they're 2 totally different energies based on what that means to you. Like it's not the same for everybody. Yeah, I love that you bring that up.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, tell us more about your work, where they can connect with you, anything you have going on, and all of those things.
So if you want to do any one-on-one work with me, or you want to work on your individual development, I have a site that is my SeonaidLee.com, but has the products. It goes products.seonaidlee.com. That's where you would look at some of my workshops and some of my journals and things like that. If people want to do organizational development, so if you're interested in bringing these kinds of communication skills into your organizations, I would say probably small to medium-sized teams, so 5 to 50 people. I can do facilitation for workshops around that. And then you would go to my main website and there's a contact form, or there you can book a 45-minute conversation with me and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. You can do that if you're on an individual basis as well. So if you just want to go like, I'd like to know whether this woman can help me with this problem, you can go look at my website and there's a book me form and it's always open.
Nice.
So.
Perfect. And I will have those links in the show notes.
Fabuloso.